And now we will be moving on to the first of the two Goliath settlements that are located in Chapter 2, Skytower Shelter. Skytower Shelter is home to the Akhenathi Goliath tribe, and as we can see here, they are located super duper far away from civilization. Hold on, let's take a look here. It's on average 30 miles. Like, that's ridiculously far from civilization. Holy crap. And Wormdoom Crag, the other one which we'll be getting to later, is even further. Ridiculous. So who are these Goliath tribes and what are they doing? Well, they are just simply another group of people that are just living up in these lands, specifically up in the mountains, of course. They are located very, very far from civilization, and they mostly keep to themselves, but they can potentially be found if your players go out into the wilderness. And most important of all, your players may have already had Goliath interactions if they've interacted with any of the Goliath werebears running around the place. So obviously the question is, how are you going to get your players to go to any of those locations should you desire? It is super duper far away, and more often than not, it's not going to pertain to the main quest that you have baked up in this adventure. But there is some decent little hooks here, so let's go ahead and look at these, shall we? For the Tall Tale here, they kind of double dipped here. They basically lumped the Tall Tale in with Skytower Shelter and Wormdoom Crag. We don't see Goliaths much around here, but there are two feuding clans in the spine of the world. I bet if someone from 10 towns were to help them put aside their differences, all Goliaths would benefit. I'd sure like to meet a Goliath someday. You know, what random person's saying this? What? First off, how do the people know that the Goliaths are feuding? Secondly, is the only motivation to help these Goliaths to meet a Goliath? What the heck? If you haven't already met a Goliath, then how the heck do you know about this? What the Tall Tale should say is, hey, if we get these two Goliaths to stop feuding, then they can put aside their differences and help the 10-towners, and that would be a tremendous amount of help. Because, man, the 10-towners are getting swamped with a whole bunch of things. There's gnolls running around the place, there's berserkers, there's ragged nomads, there's Durgar, there's, just the cold that they gotta deal with. If you spin it as these Goliaths could potentially help the 10-towners versus, oh, I'd get to meet one someday, that'd be neato, that's a little bit weak. And by a little bit weak, I mean a lot bit weak. Go ahead and change it up to, hey, the Goliaths are a tremendous amount of help, and let's, build them together. For the quest that can tie us to this location, we have a Goliath problem. Quan, the monolith Akhenathi, is a Goliath warrior. She left Skytower Shelter and was on a quest to find Oyamanartark. Oyamanartark being the famous Goliath werebear that's floating around this place. However, once she made her way to 10 towns, she got into gambling, and she fell into debt in gambling. And to pay off these debts, she began to steal, and she has now lost her warrior's honor. She wants to go ahead and make the two Goliath tribes come together as friends again, and this will obviously make the Goliaths stronger as a whole. And specifically, it states here that she wants to unite them in order for them to bring an end to the Frostmaiden's everlasting winter. This is a very good hook because that's saying, hey, the Goliaths recognize that there's an issue. Maybe we can get all these strong warriors on our side and they can totally help us out in whatever epic fight that is going to be coming our way. What's cool here is Quan has a stolen figurine of wondrous power, specifically a silver raven, that she offers to the characters as a reward for their help. The thing about this, though, is if Quan admits that this thing was stolen, you're going to have to, one, come up with where the heck was this thing stolen from, and two, if you do tell your players that it is stolen, then they may be on the up and up and say, hey, we can't accept this, we gotta go ahead and return it to whoever you stole it from. So where did this figurine come from? You could just simply say it was stolen from the tribes, and that makes it super simple. You go ahead and have the Goliath hand it to the party, and then the party hands it to the rest of the Goliaths, easy peasy. Or if you want it tied more into 10 towns, you could have it where one of the town speakers had this wondrous gift and your players have to go ahead and wrestle with the moral conundrum of keep this awesome item to themselves or give it back to whoever it rightfully belongs to. These two quests are awesome, but of course there is many more things you could introduce onto the players, such as one of your players could in fact be a Goliath, and they might be from around this neck of the woods, and they might just go ahead and return back to their respective tribe. Another fun way you can tie your players into coming to this location is you could tell your players that there is a group of people that is able to tame griffons, and that would be a really cool incentive because your players say, hey, maybe flying around would be a pretty dope thing to do. Let's go ahead and head over to Skytower Shelter and maybe we can go ahead and buy some griffons or something. Who knows? We'll get to this in a moment, but once your players get there, they are not able to buy griffins. But speaking of griffins, I like the idea of having this be an escort quest making your way to Skytower Shelter. You could have a Goliath and a Griffin who were flying in the snow somewhere, and they were either attacked or they fell because of a blizzard, and they crash landed near all of the 10 towns and are both injured and too weak to make the travel alone. The Goliath can go ahead and confide to the party and say, hey, I need to get back to the Skytower Shelter, but there's no way I can make it there. There's no way this Griffin can make it there. Could you please escort us to the place, and maybe you can go ahead and help us out? This will tie your players into the fact that there is griffins running around the place, and during that very, very extensive travel, the Goliath can go ahead and impart all the exposition that you desire. The fact that Skytower Shelter and Wormdoom Crag are currently enemies right now. The fact that they oppose O'Real, and of course that they are a strong and mighty people. There is a lot of hooks to get your players to Skytower Shelter, but the thing is, to get to Skytower Shelter, it is a pain in the wane. Look at this. Like I said, like next to 30 miles away. Goodness gracious, yeah, it's 28, 29, maybe 30 miles away, depending on how you navigate and how you go around these mountains, because, mind you, that Cave of the Berserkers is right there, so let's go ahead and say that you go ahead and traverse through this tiny little mountain pass. Yeah, 30 miles. So there is a lot of things that can happen as your players are trying to navigate the spine of the world. But hopefully your players can make it there safe and sound without having to deal with too many avalanches and yetis and cave berserkers, oh my. Once your players crawl their way through these mountains and this bitter snow, they can finally find themselves at the face of Skytower Shelter. For the description of the Skytower Shelter, the only thing we really get here is the fact that this place is carved into the face of a 1,500-foot high mountain. Tunnels are 10 feet high throughout, and the caves are lit by torches. So thankfully, anybody who doesn't have dark vision can go ahead and have an excuse to see inside. In Area 1, we get the stone causeway, and it's as your players are making their way up this causeway, they'll be able to see that circling overhead are 6 griffins. They'll be flying high enough that they don't look like they're about to attack anybody, and you should totally make that present. You should totally make that, visible to your players that, hey, these things are just simply looking at you. They're not attacking you. Because it would be terrible for negotiations if your players are walking up to this place and they don't know all about the griffins and the goliaths being tied together. Your player just goes ahead and says, I shoot the griffin, and then, that's going to be really, really bad. However, of course, once your players make their way up even closer, the griffins are going to shriek, and this is going to alert all of the goliaths that, hey, someone's approaching, and they are going to arm themselves. If for some reason your players do go to blows with either the griffins or the goliaths inside, then either force is going to go ahead and join in, because screw whoever shows up to a household and starts shooting up the place. In Area 2, we have Barricade and Chieften, and it's here where your players will arrive, and they will see that the place is barricaded up, and a Goliath will go ahead and shout out saying, turn back, you are not welcome here. The Goliath here will only say this if they are approaching alone, but if they have a Goliath companion by their side, specifically that's from Skytower Shelter, then Arn Rockfist, the chieftain of this area that's shouting all this, will go ahead and let them in. So if your players arrive here and they don't have a Goliath by their side, they just came here just on a whim and on a rumor, then the Goliath is going to go ahead and tell them, bring me the white cloak of Ogilai, the chieftain of Wormdoom Crag. Basically, he's going to go ahead and make you do a fetch quest because, 1, he wants to make that other guy look bad, and 2, he just doesn't want to bother with you. So if your players ask the Goliath, hey, why do you not like those Wormdoom Crag Goliaths? Then Arn will go ahead and say, many summers ago, the children of Skytower challenged the children of Wormdoom Crag to a game of goat ball. One of the children of Wormdoom, angered at being knocked off her perch, threw the ball at one of our griffins and struck it in the head. It wounded her in return. The game was called off. Days later, hunters from Wormdoom climbed our mountain and slew our griffin in its nest. A grave insult. We have been at war ever since. However, if your players have already been to Wormdoom Crag, or if they go there right now after hearing all this, they are going to hear another story. And basically, I'll get to in a moment, basically, what happens when you can join all the stories here. But regardless, Arn is going to say, hey, go ahead and bring me the cloak of Ogilai and either kill him or don't. Doesn't matter to me. I just want to make him look weak. So your players that are a little bit more diplomatic, and your players that have already been to Wormdoom Crag and talked to the Goliaths there, they might go ahead and say, hey, maybe we should set up a meeting somewhere and we can go ahead and hash out our differences, forget this whole fighting thing. But what it states here is, only by restoring Kanikia's site, which is located in Area 4 here, and we'll get into in a moment, can convince Arn to meet with Ogolai and settle their differences, and only at Skytower Shelter or on neutral ground. More often than not, if you're trying to get these two Goliaths to come together, they're probably going to have to be doing it on neutral ground because both of them don't want to do it at the other's territory. There's a lot of fun roleplay things you can do with this in regards of maybe siding with one Goliath tribe over the other. Maybe you make them just go ahead and fight each other and make them weaker. Or most important of all, hopefully you have some good aligned characters and they try and hash things out. I'll be getting to handling the roleplay between the two Goliath tribes at the end of this little video here. In Area 3, we have the Overlook here, and basically what it just says here is that there's 5 Goliath warriors that are standing around, and they are just essentially on guard duty. Nothing really special going on here. In Area 4, we have the Chieftens Cave, and it's here where Arn and his husband and his family are just located here at all times. If your players fight their way through here, then of course they're going to go ahead and fight back, no problem. But if your players make their way through here on more cordial affairs, they'll be able to see the following. Harad Cloudstriker, Arn's husband, Kanikia Stormcrow, Arn's mother, and a domesticated cragcat by their side. Kanikia is the elderly matron of this little group here, and she is blind. It states here that your players can, in fact, cure this blindness with magic, but it doesn't actually specifically say what kind of spell. So you could make it as simple as a cure wounds, but you should probably make it something along the lines of restoration, whether that be lesser or greater. Probably lesser, because greater restoration would probably be impossible depending on what level your group is at this time. So hopefully your players can go ahead and restore her blindness and get Arn on their good side and make the Goliaths a little bit more easy around the players. Another cool thing listed here is the fact that Harad is honor-bound to not draw blood first. So if the players are invited in here and they're talking, Harad will never take the first blow if it's looking like it's going to come to combat. He will go ahead and try and go to the players into combat if things are going that way. But if things are on good circumstances, then hopefully he doesn't have to try and go at them and say, come on, hit me, come on. In Area 5, we have the Shrine of Mind and Spirit. And what's really cool here is that there is a runestone. And engraved in this runestone are sacred stones. There's in fact 2 of them located in Skytower Shelter. This one in particular is cool. If you go ahead and meditate in front of this thing for 1 hour, then you get a bardic inspiration essentially. Once within the next 24 hours, whenever you make a wisdom or charisma check, you can add a d6 to the roll. Pretty cool. You really it's honestly not that big of a deal, honestly. Depending on what you're doing and where you're going and all that. And most important of all, if you even have the ability to go ahead and meditate for an hour, that's probably not going to come up too often. And it more often than not isn't going to make the difference. But it does have some cool roleplay elements. If the Goliaths let your players in here, whether because they had a Goliath join them or they settled the differences or, whatever the case may be, then maybe the Goliaths go ahead and have a certain time during the day where they go ahead and meditate. And you can have your players join in on this meditation. And this will be, one of those things where these outsiders are witnessing these traditions that they're not accustomed to. And they're kind of, witnessing all this. And it can be a cool little event. It doesn't have to be necessarily spiritual in a sense, but it can just be steeped in honor and tradition. In Area 6, we have the Griffons Cave, and it's here where your players will be able to see, of course, all of the nesting griffins. And what's really cool is when your players arrive, they'll see a Goliath perched up on the precipice right next to a baby griffin, and the Goliath will go ahead and say, "Come no closer, the youngling is afraid to fly, and his mother is trying to get some rest." And this is where we get the cool art of this Goliath chilling here. Chilling pun intended, of course, but look at this art. It is just, oh man, I love this art. And I can just imagine your players are right behind here and they're witnessing this and they can tell that this Goliath is probably freezing to death, but knows that it's trying to give the confidence it needs to this baby griffin because this baby griffin hasn't, jumped the nest yet. Her name is Rahi Skydreamer, and she is listed as being the clan's spiritual guide and a chief caretaker of the griffins living in the lair. So Rahi is distrusting of strangers, and if you want to approach closer, you're going to have to make a DC 18 persuasion check in order to get even closer. And if you say, hey, maybe I can go ahead and help this baby griffin out, then you can make a DC 15 animal handling check. On a failure, the baby griffin's going to go ahead and nip at your fingers, and Rahi's going to say, hey, back off. But if you succeed, then she's actually going to be genuinely impressed that you're able to handle these baby griffins. If the party earns Rahi's trust, then she might approach a Goliath member of the party and offer to teach them the ways on how to tame a griffin. The thing that sucks about this is, more often than not, most groups aren't going to have a Goliath in their party. You know, it's just one of many, many races that are in this D&D game, and it's just more than likely that no one's going to be a Goliath. So that really sucks to gate off content based on what race you are. So I would go ahead and say that if they've earned Rahi's trust enough, then Rahi should be able to say, hey, you know, maybe I could teach anybody that's not a Goliath to tame griffins. So we get this nice little section here on griffin taming, and what it states here is that the Goliaths don't ride the griffins. They basically use them as hunting falcons, and they stick relatively close by and are able to respond to whistles. But here's the real kicker about all this. It states here that it takes a full year to learn the secrets of taming a griffin. I'm willing to bet that more often than not, most people that run this module in particular aren't running it as a super duper lengthy campaign. Most 5e modules are ran with the assumption that time goes by relatively slowly and the course of the adventure is not long at all. But if you are running one of those games where time does take forever and there's a lot of downtime activity and months, even years pass in, then running it as is perfectly fine. But of course, having it be a full year to tame a griffin is pretty ridiculous. But here's even the biggest kicker. It takes this full year to try and tame this griffin, and at the end of the year, you make a single DC 15 animal handling check, and on a failure, then you don't tame it. You do get advantage if you accept Rahi's guidance, and, you know, that can be helpful a lot, but it's still a DC 15 animal handling check, and more often than not, people are not going to have expertise in animal handling, and thus your chances are probably going to be at this point maybe a 50-50. And we get this nice little progression stat block here of a baby griffin being relatively weak, and then the young griffin a year in has a little bit stronger, then 2 years in it's a juvenile, and then lastly after 3 years it becomes a full-blown griffin. So this is really neat stuff, really cool stuff, but of course if you run it purely as written, and if you run the module kind of as intended, then unfortunately this isn't going to matter because more often than not, no one's going to be a Goliath. More often than not, you're going to not take a full year out of your life to tame a griffin. And even if you do take that full year to tame a griffin, there is a semi-decent chance that you are just going to fail on that one DC 15 animal handling check. So I strongly recommend that if you have someone in the party that really, really wants that griffin, if you have that group that loves collecting that menagerie of animals and critters, then go ahead and change this up. Especially if you have a ranger who intends on being a beast master, having this griffin be the beast that they take in their care would be totally awesome. For starters, I say get rid of the Goliath tag. You don't need to be a Goliath to tame a griffin. Secondly, instead of taking a full year to tame this griffin, maybe narrow it down to maybe a month and then you get that check. And thirdly, I would go ahead and say make it a string of checks, not just a single check, because if you have a single check, then you have a single chance to fail. Versus if it is over the course of many checks, then, you know, at least the averages play out a little bit better. But play this up to your own desires. Obviously, not every group is going to want a griffin, and more importantly, you might not want to give a griffin to your players because having something they got to babysit could be annoying, and it could be just another thing that is tied to one of the many little critters that is attached to their party, and you probably just don't want that. In Area 7, we have the Shrine of Strength and Honor. This is the second of the shrines here, and once again, you can go ahead and play this up as your players, you know, basically follow all these Goliaths all day long if they're hanging out around here, and maybe some of the Goliaths decided to worship the shrine one day and then the other shrine the other day, or maybe they spread it out over time. Maybe some Goliaths prefer one shrine over the other. There's a lot of fun things you can do with this. But mechanically, what this particular runestone does is, after spending an hour meditating or praying in front of this thing, then you are given a d6, and you can use this in the next 24 hours, and you can use this on any strength roll or attack check you make. Something that kind of gets lost in the text here is the fact that this runestone has something written here. It states that there is scripture written in Dwarvish, and it talks about how goliaths want glory, and there is no glory if there is no challenge. It's saying that there is no glory for a Goliath who is unchallenged in battle, athletics, or competition, just as there is no glory for the griffon that slays a mouse. So that should press on your characters what kind of people the Goliaths are. They are people that don't want things for free. They want a challenge because they want to overcome those challenges. In Area 8, we have the Passage of Carvings, and it's here where your players will be able to see a little bit of the history of the Goliaths of Skytower Shelter. How they came here 400 years ago, how they conquered and tamed all of the griffons around here, and their friendship and soured friendship between the Sky Tower and the Wormdoom Goliaths. What's really cool here too is the newest carving depicts lone Goliaths chasing a giant polar bear, and this is representing Oyama Nartark. And this is symbolic of a diminished population of Sky Tower Goliaths contending with the seemingly endless winter. And this is here where you can definitely press into your players that, hey, these Goliaths, even though they are definitely built for the cold still sucks and it's killing them. So they definitely want to end O'Reil's endless winter. In Area 9 here, we have the Feasting Cave, and this is where you're going to find a lot of the Goliaths, as they probably don't have anything better to do than other than just sit around and hang out with their friends. But what's really cool here is if you come in here and you are making friends with the Goliaths, or at least just talking to them, then the Goliaths here can go ahead and show off their competitions of strength here, and your players can go ahead and join in on the fray. How this competition works is everybody is given a rock, and they have to hold this rock parallel with the floor. At the end of every minute, each participant must succeed on a DC 5 athletics check. However, this increases by 5 every single minute. So the first one, super duper easy, no problem. In fact, some people wouldn't even be able to fail that one, even though they rolled a nat 1. But obviously, after every minute, it gets harder and harder. So of course, you have everyone that's involved is just rolling dice until someone fails, or if they fail at the same time, then lo and behold, they tie. So beating the Goliaths is actually the best outcome here, because any character who wins the rock holding contest earns the respect of the Goliaths in this cave. They say, oh hey, you know what you're doing, you're strong, you're cool, whatever. And that sign of respect will grow into friendship. If any of the characters lose, then they look like total wusses and they suck. But if they tie, then they're probably on equal footing, and the Goliaths don't have anything really to say bad about, because hey, you just tied this random stranger that just showed up here. In Area 10, we have the Communal Cave, and this is where the Goliaths go ahead and sleep. But what's really cool here is that there is a ton of loot. These Goliaths have a bejesus ton of loot, and the thing is, they don't need it. They obviously don't use gold in their day-to-day activities. The only time they ever use any gold at all is if they are sending some Goliaths to the 10 towns in order to do whatever business or whatever. So more often than not, they collect all the supplies over the course of all their hunting and fights and whatever else, and they just stockpile it here. So if you have players that are feeling a little bit sticky-fingered, they might wander up in here and see this veritable treasure hoard and may try and take a thing or two. And for the final bit here, we have ending the Goliath feud. So as previously mentioned, the best outcome to this solution is your players go to both of these locations, interact with the Goliaths, and get them to meet on neutral grounds where they can go ahead and hash things out. The only issue is you have to do a little bit of legwork here, not only in regards of traveling back and forth between these locations, but also you have to convince both of the Goliath chieftains to go out and meet in neutral ground. The only way you're going to convince Arn Rockfist to go to these negotiations is by restoring his mother's sight, and his mother will go ahead and say, hey, you should go ahead and do this. The only problem is Ogolai has her own quest that she's going to give to the players, but of course, once your players arrive to the area, they probably should be able to easily handle it. I'm going to go ahead and talk about the negotiations after dealing with all of the Wormdoom Crag locations, because that'll get us a better idea on how Ogolai works and how your players are going to convince the two parties to go ahead and come together and form a happy union.